So good morning. Oh, someone else. Oh, Stephen's coming in. Right. Couple of people. Connor and Stephen. All right. So good morning. Welcome to this is Wednesday, May 29th, 2024. And this is the contracts class. A little abbreviated this week because of the holiday. Good morning, Stephen. And Connor and Autumn. I know that Connor probably can't.
Hey, Linda, good morning.
Good morning. Um, uh, I know if you're tuning in while you are at another job or something like that, that your participation is quite limited. I completely understand that, and I appreciate everyone being here. Um, Autumn, have we met? If we have, I apologize, but so if you can participate, please do. We can always interrupt me with questions as we're talking here or put things in the chat. Oh, someone's already put something in the chat here. All right, Autumn says good morning to everyone. All right, so I don't believe we met yet. It's nice to meet you virtually. All right, same to you, Autumn. So this is an abbreviated contracts week because of the holiday on Monday. Krista and I both kind of forgot that we were doing that. I know that last week I kept referencing what I was going to be doing this week. So typically on Monday of the second week of contracts class, we talk about getting ready to write an offer, preparing to write an offer, and then today, Wednesday, we would be writing the offer. There's no way I'm going to get through both of those today, but I am going to start with preparing to write an offer because sometimes that is the most important part of it. And then I'll share some other cheat sheets that I have and that kind of thing probably in the second hour here. So here anyway, welcome to writing an offer contracts class. So, and this is being recorded. If you ever want to go back and look at it, I think maybe it's being uploaded to Facebook. We're still working out ways of sharing on Facebook Live again. I know there's a way that we can do it, but it seems awfully complicated to my simple little mind. So we're recording this on Zoom and making it available. If you ever want to reference anything that we talk about here today, and of course, always, please feel free to text me, call me, email me. I'll go ahead and say that at the beginning of the class, but I'll say it again at the end of the class. My cell phone number is 913-219-2289. I do respond quicker to text than I do to phone calls or emails, but feel free to call me. Sometimes I can answer my phone, but usually if I'm in the classroom or something, it's usually easier for me to text back rather than return a phone call. But feel free to call me and leave me a message. And my email address is contracts, plural, contractscoach@kwkey.com. We haven't quite worked out my KWNKC email address yet, so that's still the best way to get me, and will always be that will always forward to me too, even when we get the other one up and running. So, all right, so today we're going to kind of start in on preparing to write an offer. And so let's do just a little bit of background on that too, before we ever even get to the paperwork, because writing a good offer begins long before we have the paperwork. Start with the paperwork. So when you are out with a buyer under buyer agency agreement, and so you've worked out commission with them, before you ever go see the property, you look to see if at this point in time, if the seller's willing to pay a buyer agency commission. Probably make a phone call to get in the habit of making a phone call to the listing agent, but we'll get to that here in just a minute, which I think you should have been doing all along. I've always done it throughout my career. Sorry, I'm working with a new chair this morning, so I'm kind of bouncing around on it, which is kind of its purpose. So you're at the property with the buyer, and the buyer is saying or showing signs of being interested in this property, or saying that they are very interested in this property and want to write an offer, either way. So there are lots of things that you should be looking at and the property as you are going through. Again, starting way back, even before we show the property, when you've chosen a property, there's something that you have presented to the buyer, or something that the buyer has presented to you that they want to go see. If it's available on MLS, then I always look at the seller's disclosure if it's available. If it's not available, I'm making a phone call or an email to the listing agent. Sometimes if they haven't quite got it uploaded into the MLS system, sometimes they will go ahead and email that to you. So I always reach out or text the agent to ask about the seller's disclosure. Then, and if it's available, I send it to the buyer. There may be something on that seller's disclosure that would change the buyer's mind about wanting to see it. I also recommend to the buyer that they, at the very least, look at the parcel map that's available, see if it's nearby any commercial, if it's sitting on or next to a busy street, if there's anything. And sometimes by the parcel map, you can tell if there's a creek there that they would not want to live by. You know, there are various things. Creeks don't bother some people, but they bother others. So just suggest that they do that. I know sometimes time doesn't allow this when we're looking at one of those properties that's in one of our hot pockets of the market here, but I always suggest that the buyer drive by the property. There are certain things that you can only tell by being at the property that you can't tell from a parcel map. You certainly can't tell from the photos on MLS. There may be a house next door that, you know, hasn't been painted in 25 years, or, you know, has, if there's no active homes association, you know, might have 5 vehicles up on cinder blocks, you know, or, you know, those kinds of things that would bother some people. So, so all of those things before you ever go look at the property. Then as you're at the property, compare what you're seeing to what you, and the property to what you see on the seller's disclosure. If there's, you know, the refrigerator, if the seller is saying that the refrigerator is staying with the property, you know, look at that. If there are shelving, if there is shelving in the garage or in the basement, that doesn't appear to be attached, or even if it does appear to be attached, and that's important to that buyer. And you might only know if it's important to the buyer if you mention it. So those are things that, as an agent, that we depend on you to kind of determine, notice and determine. So you might point out to the buyer, hey, there are shelves here in this little workshop area out here in the garage. Is that important to you that those stay, or do you care? You know, the seller's disclosure doesn't mention those, so we just want to clarify. If they're important to you, we will write them in. You know, those kinds of things. So you're talking about all of those things. Of course, you're looking at the space and the condition and all of that. Also, but compare what you're seeing at the property to what you see on the seller's disclosure. Then when the buyer is telling you or giving indication that they do want to write an offer on this property, there are certain things within the contract that you need to know from them to write the contract. Because in today's world, seldom are we sitting with the buyer when we're writing the offer. You know, in perfect world, and those of you that maybe haven't done any of the documents yet with an actual buyer, the way we're taught in pre-licensed classes, you're newly licensed agents, the way you're taught in pre-licensed class isn't necessarily the way that it's done in real life. So you will probably most of the time be separated from your buyer when you're writing your offer, when you're writing their offer. And so, of course, you can reach out to them with texts and that kind of thing, but it's so much easier and cleaner if you have clarified some contract terms with them before you ever start writing it. Also, prepare your buyer for the fact when they say, well, yes, we want to write an offer on this one. You know, let me back up just a second here on this too. You know, back in the old days, when everything was done in ink, that's, you know, we would have the buyer come back to the office with us, or, you know, meet at a coffee shop or McDonald's, or, you know, whatever was convenient. But I would always also tell them, prepare them for it. And this is true in today's world. Say, it's going to take me a while to do that. Don't expect me to be done in 15 or 20 minutes with this. This is going to take hour and a half, 2 hours to do it properly. And again, you all coming into the business don't know maybe anything different, but we are sometimes on a real tight time frame. We may be seeing the property at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and we've been told that there's that deadline of 5 or 6 o'clock for offers. Don't let that panic you. That's one of those things, make a note to talk to the listing agent about. Say, I understand you have a deadline. We're going to do our very best to meet that, but we may be a few minutes past that. Most of the time that deadline is set, it's a deadline, but it's kind of a moving target too, kind of a serving suggestion. So, if it's at 6 o'clock and you're not getting one to them until 9, that's a whole different thing. But if it's a 6 o'clock deadline and you can't possibly get it to them before 6:30, most agents are somewhat understanding about that, because we've all been on the other side of that. So we've all been on both sides. So, all right, so you're walking through the property, you're clarifying things, talking with the buyer about certain things. Now, bear in mind that you are not an inspector, but we do expect you to have your realtor eyes and see things that might be an inspection issue or an inspection consideration. If they ask you about the crack in the foundation, you are not an inspector. You can't answer that question, but you can say, I'm not sure, but that might be something that if we go under contract on this property, that we might consider getting a structural engineer out here. We might wait and see what the whole house inspector says about it. But it might be a structural engineer. Again, preparing them for the things, and then also the cost for that. Structural engineer reports, the $250 range in today's world, I think. It's been a while since I've been involved in one. So yes, I do still sell real estate, but my husband takes care of most of the heavy lifting on that. My husband and I are partners. He joined my business a few years ago. So as you're going through the property, those things, now you're with it. So now the buyer says, yes, we want to write the offer, prepare them for that. Say, go have dinner, you're not going to hear from me. I may have some questions for you along the way, but this will not be ready for at least an hour and a half. And I'm saying that from personal experience. I've been doing this for 40 years. And it would still take me that long to get together a proper offer, everything that needs to go in the file. And we'll talk about that here a little bit later too. It's not just the contract. All right. There are all kinds of things. All of those things that we talked last week about being in the buyer folder. We need to make sure that they are signing the inspection advisory, that they are signing the franchise disclosure, franchise and business affiliated business disclosure, that they understand about lead-based paint, all of those things. And if you haven't had those conversations with them, now is the time to do it. All right, and here's a help for you here, and I'm going to share screen. Make sure I've got the right thing pulled up here. Before I share, because I'm not 100% sure. Where is it? I promise I had this all ready to go, but now I can't find it. It's also in Primo. All right, so back to Zoom. All right, so we do have a little cheat sheet here for you. It does need to be updated some. I've talked about this for months, and it is on my list to update this. Number one, we need to put our new logo on it. But then there are also some things here. Kristen put this together several years ago. And so for you to find this, you can find this in 2 different places. You can find this in Kristen's Power Tools, which are available on the Facebook launch page. You can also access Kristen's Power Tools through the portal. And if you don't know how to access the portal, talk with your coach about that. But this is available to you a couple of different ways. And if you can't, and those things do get a little crowded. The Power Tools folder is a little crowded, and I find it a little difficult to find certain things in there. And so if this is something that you want, reach out to me, text me, or email me. and I will email it to you so that you can put it into your files. But once you find it in the Power Tools, make sure that you download it into your files or upload it into your files as well. So, okay, so we have our ready to make an offer. Have these things in place first. So the first three bullet points here, the agency disclosure brochure, the exclusive buyer agency contract, and the pre-approval letter. Those are three of the things that we need in your buyer folder, along with a couple of things, then one of those things that needs to be added here. So when you do get this form, make sure that you add the inspection advisory, the inspection advisory disclosure, the lead-based paint disclosure, and it's my suggestion to you that you put, not the disclosure, I'm sorry, the lead-based paint brochure. It's my suggestion to you that you put that in every buyer folder and share it with every buyer, because you never know. They may be telling you that they want to look at new construction, but then they'll end up buying something very old that's been completely remodeled or rehabbed. And so you don't want to have forgotten to give them that brochure. So the two things that I think, three things actually, okay, three things that aren't necessarily compliance, but I think the lead-based paint brochure, the inspection advisory, I still think it's a good idea to put the cyber protection warning in there too. Cyber crime is huge in our business. And so it's in our buyer agency agreement, it's in our listing agreement, and it's in our contract. But I also think that having that separate addendum out there is also very helpful. So those are things that I suggest you put in every buyer folder, along with the agency disclosure brochure. Again, I suggest that you put both the Kansas and Missouri, because sometimes buyers change their mind about where they want to live. We can't find what they're looking for in Lenexa, but we can certainly find it over in Grandview. So they've changed states there on us. So I think it's just, again, you don't want to forget to have, oh, Callie's coming in this morning too. You don't want to have forgotten to have given them the proper one. So both state agency disclosure brochures, the lead-based paint brochure that's available in the KCRAR residential 2024 residential forms folder, and it's under EPA. Everything's alphabetical in that list. It's under the EPA because that's provided to us from the Environmental Protection Agency. And then, of course, you're going to have your exclusive buyer agency contract, which is very important. Again, get in the habit of making the agency disclosures and getting a buyer under agency contract before you show them any properties, making sure that they understand the way that the commission world is going to be changing now, commission payment world. And please don't be showing them properties unless you have a pre-approval letter for them, and have that pre-approval letter in your file. There's nothing worse than a buyer telling you that they want to be looking at $500,000 properties. And yes, they've got an application into a lender, and the lender comes back and says, and so you've shown them $500,000 properties, and the lender comes back and says that they're only approved for $400,000 and they can't buy what they've been looking at. It's really hard for the buyer to step back down in price range like that. Excuse me. Allergies hitting this morning. All right, so have those in your file, in your loop. And that's another reminder that I want to give everyone here. As you are starting a buyer agency loop or a listing agreement, please include me as a person on that loop, and my profile in that loop. Then when you click on my name, you'll get a little pop-up box, and on the far right-hand side, there's a little box, I think. It might not be far right hand, but on the right hand side of that, add to my team is one of your options, and please check that box. That puts me into the loop, and that allows me to see everything that you have in that loop, so that you don't have to share things with me. I promise you, I don't go in and look at loops for fun. I don't have the time or the energy to do that. I will only go in and look at your loop when you tell me that you are ready for me to look at something. So all of these things are in your loop. Then documents that you'll need for your offer. Number one, a residential real estate sales contract. Again, in the KCRAR forms template, 2024 residential forms template folder in .loop. And that's what it's called, the residential real estate sales contract. And there are 3 different versions in there. One of them says residential, and that's what you're 99.9% of the time going to be dragging or putting into your loop, dragging into your loop. A copy of the pre-approval letter, because you will be sending that to the listing agent along with the offer. A copy of the earnest check. We're getting further and further away from buyers actually presenting checks. We still do occasionally get those. Most of the time it's a direct deposit kind of thing, so prepare your buyer for that. But if they are going to be writing a check, that would be one thing to clarify with them before you go write your offer. Even though it's the same box that we check, if they're going to be writing a check, it's a good idea for you to have a copy of that check. The seller's disclosure addendum, we find that on MLS. It's in the documents clickable line in MLS, so you will have access to that seller's disclosure. Put that into your buyer's loop, because you're going to be needing to add their initials to the bottom of that. That's going to be a PDF. It's not going to be a live .loop document. So you'll need to be adding their initials to every page of that, their signature on the last page. Make sure that they have read it. That they have had access to it. We can't make them read anything, but make sure they've had access to it long before you send it to them for their initials and signatures. We want them, that's the whole purpose of it, is to let the buyer know, and us as their buyer's agents, but make sure that the buyer has had an opportunity to look it over. The lead-based paint disclosure addendum, if there is one, if a property is built before 1978, there has to be a lead-based paint disclosure. Sometimes there may be rare occasions anymore these days where there won't be a seller's disclosure available. In certain situations, if it's not, we have to add that to the contract, that we acknowledge that there's not one, but there is never, ever, ever any situation in which on a property built before 1978 that you will not have a lead-based paint disclosure. If they're not in MLS yet, we have to address that on the contract. And I hope that that's one of the things I get to in the second hour today, but if not, we have to ask for it. Number one, you are actually verbally asking the listing agent for it, but it also, if we don't have it by the time we present the offer, we have to acknowledge in the offer that we are requesting one within 24 hours or 48 hours. I don't like even to allow 48 hours on that one. Should be 24 unless we're talking about a weekend here. The company franchise addendum, we talked about that in the buyer agency. We have an updated one that has loans and KC and insurance agency on it. So make sure you're using the proper one, and that is only for us. That's an internal form only. We do ask our buyers to sign it, but we don't send it along with our offer. When you have a listing, you will occasionally have let me back up. On the listing agent may have their franchise and affiliated business disclosure in the documents on MLS and asking our buyer to sign it, and that's perfectly all right. We certainly can have our buyer sign that. We have to add their signatures to that, but we don't ask the other side of the transaction to sign our internal document. It's internal only, but you have to have it for compliance. You have to have it in there to get paid. You may need a legal description addendum. If there's not one provided in MLS, if it's a very lengthy legal description and not you can't put it into the contract and it still be legible, then you might have to add one. So that's a possibility. And any other documents in the MLS supplement. So again, the co-op business disclosure, franchise disclosure, affiliated business disclosure. And on certain properties, there may not be our KCRAR seller's disclosure. There may be one on a corporate owned property or on a foreclosed property. They may have their own version of that. There may be other things that the seller has already provided. On certain properties, you might get a seller that's already filled out and signed in its present condition addendum. Not real crazy about that, but I mean, they're proving the point or expressing the point that they're selling as is. I don't like it when they've already filled that out for us on especially box number 2. But, and you'll see that occasionally. There may be a septic inspection addendum on or in MLS. So certain things like cold weather waiver, the pool rider, certain things like that that might be provided to you in MLS. So go ahead and again get those into your loop, prepare those for your buyer signatures. So after you have now you've left the property, you've clarified everything about the personal property or what could be potentially personal property in the house with the buyer. Now you're going to call the listing agent. It doesn't really matter, but I usually wait until I am no longer with my buyer before I talk to the listing agent. I just, and as again, it doesn't really matter. I'm certainly not saying anything there. I'm not giving away anything about my buyer that I shouldn't be, but I think sometimes it's just a little more comfortable for the two agents to discuss things. And you can ask anything that you want to ask. I do like to make that point. There is no limitation on or kind of restriction at all on the kinds of questions that you can ask a listing agent as you're preparing for this. Now, how much they can tell you in their answers is up to them, and what their agreement is with the seller and how well they understand their agency fiduciary duties. However, you can ask whatever you want to ask. And so what Kristen has, the bullet point that we have in here, call the listing agent, ask what's going on with the property. Do you have any other offers? How much activity have you had? Have you had any second showings, that kind of thing? You don't want to. And the reason we ask that is if they say, yes, we've got 5 offers in hand, my follow-up question to that would be, and what are the terms of those? I don't even ask, can you tell me? What are the terms of those? Do you have anything over asking price? If you're pretty sure that your buyer's just going to be offering asking price on this, and they already have 4 offers over asking price there, that would be a waste of everyone's time for you to write that offer on behalf of that buyer. So that's, again, this is not in the order that I would necessarily have these. The questions to be asking your buyer is, well, do you know at this point in time, at this moment, what you might want to offer? That might not be what your offer ends up being, because I'm going to go back and do a market analysis for you. However, do you have a number in mind here? And if they say, well, I'm certainly not going to be offering asking price, is going to be way below that. And if then the listing agent tells you they already have several that are over asking price, that's a time to have for you to have a conversation with your buyer. But then I also ask the question, again, after making the point that you're not restricted in any way, what questions you can ask, I would ask why the seller is selling. You know, what the situation is. You would be surprised at the agents that don't understand their fiduciary duties, and will just tell you all kinds of things about their seller. You will also run across some very closed mouth agents, and that's perfectly okay too. Again, doesn't hurt for you to ask. But you'd be surprised. You might find out things that might put your buyer in a little stronger negotiating position. So I always ask what the situation is. If they have other offers, what the terms of those other offers are. I also asked the listing agent how we can accommodate the seller on closing date. Ask what the seller's preferred closing time frame would look like, and especially if your buyer has flexibility in what they can do. The seller might really prefer a 60-day closing, and if your buyer has the flexibility to do that, that may put you even, maybe not monetarily, you may not be able to beat other offers that way, but maybe you can on time, and that might be more important to the seller. Yes, price is important, but all of these other things are important too. Seller is concerned about their bottom line and their timing. So if we can beat other offers on timing, why not do that? So how can we accommodate the seller on closing date? And are there any other ways in which we can accommodate the seller? Any other special requests by the seller that maybe weren't listed in MLS? a couple of reasons why I do this. Again, just to see if it would be a big waste of time for us to write an offer, or if they do give you the terms and they can tell you that, well, you know, 3 of them are 10% over asking price, then that also might let your buyer know, well, you need to be at least that. Are you willing to do that? Maybe put an escalation clause in there, that kind of thing. Not going to get into those details today. That's for a whole different class. And then and so giving me ways in which maybe we can put our buyer in the best light, but it's also giving me an opportunity to have a conversation with that agent, see what our relationship might be, letting them know. And so therefore, when you're doing it, letting them know that you are a professional, you know what you're doing. David Wells is joining us here too. Callie, I never did actually acknowledge you after you came on. Good morning, Callie. And David's joining us too. Give him a couple of minutes to get in.
Good morning.
Good morning, Callie. All right, so make sure that you're calling that agent. I usually do that in the car on my way leaving the property to wherever I'm going to be writing that offer. Then I also tell my buyer before I break up with them, talking about price, when I've asked them what they think they might be offering on a property, I do like to get their first impression on that. Inevitably, they're going to ask you, well, what do you think? And that's not your job. And that's what you need to tell them. Say, well, you know, what I'm going to do, I'm not going to tell you what I would offer, because what is worth to me is not the same as what it's worth to you, buyer. But what I am going to do for you, buyer, is I'm going to go do a market analysis, just as if you already owned the property and you had called me to put it on the market. What would be, in that situation, what would be an expected sales price or a probable sales price on that? And so that's my objective answer to your question, buyer. What's a good offer? So let's, and again, folks, all of you, y'all, that's only if you have time. You may not have time to do that. Doing the CMA, depending on how you do it. Yes, MLS has a couple of CMA programs, CMA, competitive market analysis, or comparable market analysis. For those of you, some of our lingo here, I'm sure most of you are probably familiar with that, but just in case you're not. So a market analysis, our MLS does give us a couple of different options to do that. I prefer not to do that. I have, if I've been real pressed for time, it does give you at least an idea. But the reason I don't like to use the ones on MLS is because I can do nothing with the numbers. I am at the mercy of what the listing agent has put in, which may or may not be accurate. I prefer to use the one that's available to us through the portal. I don't know if Kristen has ever put this in her Power Tools or not, but I know it's available on the portal. What we now kind of call the Big Dog CMA, that David Conderman has made available to us. It's an Excel spreadsheet. Number one, I think it is more visually appealing to a lot of buyers and sellers, because it's what I use for my listings as well. And I can, I'm hesitant to use this word, but I can manipulate what I put into that. A listing agent here, because here's the thing, and I'm not going to pull up MLS and show you all of this, but when the listing agent puts in the square footage of the property, they can put in whatever they want to put in there, but they do have to recognize the source and state the source of that. If it came from tax records, if it came from an appraisal, or if it came from the owner. Well, I would prefer to use what the county says the square footage of that property is, the livable square footage. Just because I'm doing my market analysis, that's where I'm pulling all of that information on the comparables. So I'd like to have apples to apples. Because do I think that sometimes sellers might exaggerate the square footage that they have in their property? I think maybe sometimes that happens. So I prefer to use the Excel spreadsheet. Not only that, because the ones on MLS again are very useful when you're in a time crunch. I certainly have used them. I'm not telling you not to use them, but given enough time, I really prefer to use our internal form. Plus, then it also gives me a range. So then I can say, and because again, I use it for listing, this is what I use for my listings as well, but I can tell the buyer, well, here's the range based upon what has sold in the property, what's currently on the market, what's pending, and what it's sold. And I usually, and on the sold properties there. So, all right, so given enough time, do a market analysis and present that to your buyer and discuss it with them. The market analysis may, this property may be on the very, very, very top end of, maybe completely redone, all of the latest bells and whistles on it. So we're probably going to be, maybe looking at the top end of that range. If this property hasn't been updated in 15 years, that's a whole different thing. We may be on the bottom side of that range, on the bottom of the range that our MLS gives us, our market analysis gives us. So make sure that you discuss it with them. And also make sure that that's the best advice that you can give them. And that's, in fact, that is what I always say to my buyers. Here are the numbers. Here's what the numbers tell us a good sales price would be. But buyers, that does not reflect what that property is worth to you. I hope you all did learn in your pre-license class that market value of a property is not what an appraiser says. It's not what the bank says, what they're willing to lend on. It is what a buyer is willing to pay, and a seller is willing to accept. Right? That's the market value. So only the buyer can determine what that property is worth for them. If they've seen several properties in that same general area, in that same general price range, they are going to become an expert in that price range in that area, and they will have an idea. If this is the first or second property that they've seen, yeah, they may be at a little bit of a loss, which is again why I do, given enough time, I do tell my buyers, we may circle back and put an offer in on this first property we're seeing, but I really want you to see a few properties. I want you to get an idea of the market. Okay, so then the buyers need to determine, these are the things that you need to be talking to the buyer with while you are still at the property. What their offer price is, have that conversation, but that might be determined later on after you've done that market analysis for them. How much they're giving as earnest money deposit. It's again, I want to reiterate, our contract has the opportunity for earnest deposit. It is not a requirement of any contract. There does not have to be any earnest deposit with any contract. That being said, most sellers will not consider an offer that doesn't have some earnest deposit offered with it. So there's that. You will also probably hear that, well, it has to be 1%. Well, since we don't have to have earnest deposit, it certainly doesn't have to be a certain amount. Some buyers may be able to provide 1% of the sales price as their earnest deposit. Other buyers may not be able to do that. So never, ever, ever let a buyer not write an offer because they don't have 1% earnest deposit. Just make that clear when you're presenting your offer to the listing agent. 0% down buyers, if they're doing a VA or a USDA, their money may be pretty tight, and they may need the money that they have for inspections and appraisal because they have to pay for those things up front. So they may have a limited amount of money that they can put down as earnest deposit. So make sure you have that conversation with them. Does it have to be 1%? Absolutely not. Is 1% a good number to use? Well, that's kind of where our market has driven that. So yeah, I would say yes, yeah, 1%. The seller may ask for more. That's one of those negotiable items on our contract. The seller may ask for more. Buyer may be not willing to pay that much. So negotiable between the two parties. All right. Make sure before you start writing the offer that you've discussed with the buyer what their preferred closing date is, and try to match that with what we found out about what the seller's preferred closing date and closing and possession. Because those are two different dates. If you're dealing with a vacant house, then absolutely buyer gets possession at closing when everything's funded, when the funds have been dispersed is what our contract says. But it's not uncommon for in a property in which the seller is still living. It's not uncommon for the buyer to give a day or two for the seller to get their funds from the closing and then move on. Seller may need access to the funds before they can close on their new property or, do whatever it is they're going to do. So it's not uncommon for a day or two. I really, really, really try to discourage anyone from allowing the buyer to take early possession of a property before closing. We certainly have that capability. We have the documentation for that, but it's risky. But it's also risky for the seller to remain in the property anytime after closing. Even that day or two becomes a little risky, and there are things that we put into place to protect everyone there, or try to put into place on the occupancy after closing. But if the seller is asking for a week, 2 weeks, a month after closing, that's a whole different agreement. It is a separate agreement between the two parties. And then we talk about rent and who has insurance and all that kind of stuff. So, excuse me, sorry. And we'll take another pill on break time. So the buyer's preferred closing and possession date, and try to match that with what we find out about from the listing agent about the sellers. A lot of times the listing agent will put in our MLS what the seller's preferred closing time frame is. So you might have that information ahead of time. Closing costs. It is state license law, both states, that we prepare the buyer for the closing costs they will have on this particular property. So again, that's one of those things that needs to be presented to the buyer before they sign the contract, that on this particular property, if they offer this amount and they are getting a certain kind of loan, whatever their down payment is, and all of that, as well as all of the prorations on this particular property. That is very property specific because taxes are going to be different on every property. Everything else might remain the same, but there is a requirement that we have that signed by the buyer before they sign the contract. That's one of those things that if you're doing things properly, that's why it's going to take you a while, not only to get through the paperwork of the contract itself, but to get the buyer's estimated closing cost worksheet. I do teach a class specifically on that. And that will be coming around in the cycle next month. So please join me for that. We will be doing buyers' estimated closing costs and sellers' estimated proceeds next month. But if you have any question on that, please, please, please reach out. I do have a couple of cheat sheets on those as well that I can email to you. I might have time in the second hour to get through those, because that's what today is, really just preparing to write the offer. And that's a very important part of preparing to write an offer. We also have to have the next bullet point here. We also have to have the conversation about the home warranty. It is dealt with in our contract. We have to address it in our contract that the buyer is waiving the opportunity to get a home warranty or they do want a home warranty effective on closing date. If they are waiving the opportunity for a warranty, that doesn't mean they can't ever get one. That just means we're not going to be dealing with it here in the contract. If they want a home warranty, whether they're asking the seller to pay for it or they're going to be paying for it themselves, it's easiest to put it in the contract because that way we know then that the title company will be sure to get that on the closing documents, but a buyer can change their mind. And it's certainly something that we can negotiate later on as well. After inspections, during our renegotiation period, all those kinds of things. So it's not the only time, but we do have to address it. I can't remember if that was this year. No, it was last year. It was last year that became part of our contract. It's important for the buyer, right? And to have the conversation about what a home warranty is. If we can get the seller to pay for it, I think it's a no-brainer. If the buyer's going to be paying for it themselves, that might be a whole different conversation. If it's going to cost them $800 plus a $100 service fee, that's $900. Can they get repairs done for $900? How old is the equipment that the home warranty is going to cover? What exactly does the home warranty cover? Yesterday's business meeting, we had the representative from the 210 warranty here, and Matt, I think his name is Matt. I've talked with him in the past, and I feel terrible, I can't remember his name. There's a really good question and answer session at the very end of yesterday's business meeting. If you haven't had a chance to listen to that, I suggest that you do, because he answered some really great questions about warranties in general and 210 specifically. So make sure you're having that conversation with the buyer. It's also important to you that you address this, because having this conversation is one of the things that has to have happened for your errors and omissions, your E&O insurance, your errors and omissions insurance to go into effect for you. So it's important for you as well. Make sure you're talking with another thing that that I didn't talk about when we're talking about closing and possession dates. Yes, you're talking about a general time frame. If the buyer says, well, I'd like a 30, or if your lender has told you they need a 45-day closing time frame on this, make sure that you're looking at the calendar. We cannot close on weekends, nor can we close on holidays. So make sure, and it's probably best to not close on the day after a holiday, right? Mondays and then Tuesdays after a Monday holiday are not the best times to do closings. Fridays get real busy. You don't want to close the last thing on a Friday. In fact, title companies don't like to close the last thing on a Friday in case they have to contact a lender that may be in a different time zone and not available late in our late afternoon on Fridays. Thursdays, I think, are about the best days to close, because then even if the seller does need a day or two, that means they're out by Saturday and leaves then the weekend for the buyer to move in. But it's whatever works out for the buyer. Just be mindful that you're looking at the calendar for weekends and holidays, and that you are avoiding those for closing days. Possession days, it can be any day, but closing days, we can't do weekends or holidays. Inspection period, another thing. So that's what reminded me about this. How long does the buyer want for their inspection period? Our contract says 10 days, but that's the default. It can be anything. I typically ask for 12 days, 12 to 14, kind of depending on the situation, because there's going to be a weekend in there. And good luck getting an inspector out. A lot of inspectors do Saturdays, but certainly not Sundays. And again, be mindful of any holidays that may be coming up within that 10-day or next few day time frame, next couple of weeks. Allowing enough days for, I think we need to allow enough time for, even if we have our whole house inspection done in the second day of our contract period, of our inspection period, the whole house inspector may have said, well, I suggest getting a roofer out to look at it. I suggest getting an HVAC person out. If it's someone that we are going to contact to have come out, such as a roofer, I would want those extra days in there. Now, I do understand, and again, situation by situation. in a very, very competitive situation, if you know that you're in competition with other offers or will be in competition with other offers, you may want to shorten that time frame to look a little more competitive. Again, your buyer may not be able to be competitive by offering way above list price, above asking price, but they can be competitive on some of these other things. That's why, Kristen and I both say, you may be out negotiated on certain things money-wise on a contract, but if you come through our contracts class and work closely with your coaches, you will not be outmaneuvered on a contract, right? So there are certain things that may be just as important to a seller as the price that your buyer can accommodate on. Any additional inclusions, so again, that's part of our contract. There are just a few places that we have the ability to write in things. We can exclude or include personal property, or then we have one other paragraph that allows for any additional terms. I won't talk about that today. We'll talk about that when we actually do get to the contract, but additional inclusion. So if there are things in the property that on the seller's disclosure indicates are not staying with the property that are reasonable to ask for in the contract, then that's what we're talking about here. We also have additional terms or additional exclusions. If the seller's disclosure says that the swing set in the backyard is staying and our buyers don't want the swing set, they want it removed, that would be something. If the seller says that a certain appliance or personal property item is staying with the property and the buyer, I'm sorry, getting really confused here. Typically Monday, today's Wednesday. If the buyer doesn't want that, that's an exclusion. An inclusion would be, and when I say acceptable, here are the very few acceptable. We'd all prefer that they not be in there at all, but the very few acceptable things would be a refrigerator or a washer and dryer. I would be really hesitant to put all three of those things in there, although I've certainly seen contracts with them. If your buyer is getting a loan, and even if they're not, even if it is a cash transaction, I think that all of those things should be put on a bill of sale, handled separately from our contract. It is, as we talked about earlier, and it's right there at the head, the title of our document, is that a residential real estate contract. It is not a personal property contract. Lenders don't like to see personal property included. Appraisers don't like to see personal property included. So it really is a big deal if your buyer's getting a loan. It's I think a big deal even if it is a cash transaction. So so don't put anything else on. Dining room set, if buyer wants that, even if the sellers put, like a big sign on it, dining room set for sale. And even if the buyer wants that, if we have that goes elsewhere. Do not put those on our contracts. It really muddles the waters. The reason lenders and appraisers don't like to see it is because now the appraiser is going to have to put a value of those items, assign a value to those items, and subtract that from the sales price of the property. And that's not what we want at all. All right, I know it's break time here, but I am going to get through this. Info you'll need to fill out the sales document. I guess I did get to, oh no, I didn't either. Additional inclusions, so we talked about that. Any additional terms, if as we are walking through the property, and this is one of those examples that I think is on our sample contract, that Kristen wrote up. If there's a dead tree in the backyard, we might be asking for the seller to remove that. That is not a personal property thing that goes into the additional inclusions or exclusions. That is an additional term and condition. So we might ask the seller to be doing that. If there is not a seller's disclosure available or a lead-based paint disclosure available when there needs to be one, we would also include that. So that's an additional term that will kind of hit on when we actually get to the contract here. So, all right, y'all, it is 9:52. Let's go ahead and take our 10-minute break. And I think I've got another thing in the chat. Let me address that before we leave. Oh, where's the CMA located? Autumn asked. Good question. I didn't cover that. The CMA that I talked about, the Big Dog CMA, our internal form, is also in the portal. I don't know if Kristen has that in the Power Tools or not, but I know that it's in the portal. And it's under it's under KW Key, or I'm sorry, KWNKC documents. And then once you open the documents folder, it is all the way down. I think because all of those are in alphabetical order also, I think it's MLS/CMA. So that's where you'll find that in the portal. That's also where you find the buyer's estimated closing costs and the seller's estimated proceeds worksheets that we have internally, which I again suggest that you use. KCRAR makes those available to us, but I suggest that you use the internal ones, and we'll talk about that when we talk about that class next month. So, all right, so that's where it is. All right, so y'all, I will see you. It's not now 9:54. I'll see you all in 10 minutes. All right, we're back. And so good morning, all of you have stayed with me here. And David, I didn't really acknowledge you when you came on. Thanks for joining us this morning. Thank you for reaching out with the text yesterday, if that was yesterday. So I appreciate that. Autumn, that's another thing. Let me mention to you, I have everyone else's contact information in here, but I gave my phone number earlier. I'll give it here again. But if you would just text me introducing yourself, say, hey, this is Autumn. My number is 913-219-2289. And then that way I'll answer you and we'll be there. I'll be already set up for when you are reaching out with any questions about buyer agency, listing agreements, or contracts. So, all right, so we are back. We're not quite finished with our ready to make an offer. And I'm still not 100% sure that works on Zoom that way. So I will share screen here. All right, so we got through then the information that you'll need from the buyer. Now we are on information you need to fill out the sales contract. So the legal names of your buyer. Again, this is really not the time for you to be doing that. That's on the buyer agency agreement. Make sure that you're checking with your buyer as you're filling that document out. That's the best time to say, I know you as John and Susie, but how do you want things on legal documents? Do you want John and Susie, or do you want Jonathan and Susan, or middle initials? Make sure that you are using any suffixes that would be appropriate, junior, senior, second, third, whatever, those kinds of things. And their marital status, you have to have that for all of our documents. Marital status is one of the requirements on our buyer agency agreement, but buyer agency agreement is the best time to have that conversation. And then that's how you're going to put them in dot loop. So that's then how their signatures will show up on all of the documents, rather than it's okay if it's John and Susie that shows up on dot loop, because what's said in that box is really not what's important at all. It's the time and date stamp and the assigned number on that is their signature. But I think it still looks better if it's, rather than their common names, but common names if they want to use their legal names there. All right, so the legal names of the buyers you're working with, the legal names of the seller. I find this where I get this. Yes, of course, we always look at the tax records, always when we're on MLS. And I then compare that to what some of those documents are that will be included in MLS. I always look at the seller's disclosure to see how it is listed on there. Or sometimes the agent will put in some offer instructions on that particular property that might tell you that it needs to be in the name of a trust or in the name of an LLC, or, in those kinds of particular things. So make sure you're reading everything that's in MLS, all of the extra documents that are available to you. But I always use what is on the seller's disclosure, because that may be different than what's in the tax records. Tax records are pretty up to date, but they're not totally up to date. And so it may show a husband and wife or a married couple as the owners on the tax records, but maybe one of them is deceased. So and that's why the property is being sold, or at this point in time that may not be updated there, or it may be in the seller's names, but in the meantime they've put it into a trust and that hasn't been updated on the tax record. So I always look at some of the documentation and then to kind of double check that with the listing agent as well. So the legal names of the seller. So again, if we use their marital status, sometimes we will find that that marital status is not indicated on those documents. Easiest time to do it is before you write the offer, check with the listing agent about the marital status. If it's an LLC, we need to make sure, or a corporation, we need to make sure that we're reflecting that on there as well. The legal description of the property, yes, of course, we can, of course, get that off tax records. Make sure, though, too, that the listing agent hasn't included a legal description addendum with in the MLS documents. If they have, you use that. And then what we would say on the contract is see attached legal description addendum. There are a lot of agents that just do that automatically on every listing, which is not a bad idea necessarily. So, but otherwise you will use the legal description that you can access in the tax records, and you can cut and paste that into our contract. Any MLS supplements for the property, print out all of the supplements to review, and most your buyers will need to sign. Supplements could include the legal description addendum we just talked about, the seller's disclosure, the lead-based paint disclosure, the co-op franchise agreement. As I said, in today's world, a lot of times we're seeing that the seller, sometimes we're seeing that the seller is already included in its present condition addendum. There may be a pool or spa rider on there if the property has a swimming pool or spa that's remaining with the property. Could be a septic inspection addendum if the property's on a septic tank. So, and there are multiple things on there, and again, certain things that the listing agent, the co-op agent may ask our seller or I'm sorry, our buyer to sign. Financing terms. So make sure that you have everything that you need to fill out the contract. A lot of times, all of the information you need will be on the pre-approval letter, but a lot of times there is not everything you need to know there. Here's what you need to know. You need to know what kind of loan it is. Is it a conventional loan? Is it an FHA, a VA, USDA? Because we have to indicate that on our contract. It is actually information that the seller has every right to know. So that's legitimate. Our contract also asks if it's a fixed rate loan or an adjustable rate loan. Adjustable rates are coming back into our market. So that's something that we need to answer. Make sure that you understand if it's a conventional loan, well, even if it's any kind of loan, make sure you understand what relationship the down payment has to the loan. If they are putting a 20% down, regardless of what the sales price, they have 20% and they're in their price range, they have 20% down payment money, then you've got an 80-20 loan. And we'll get to that here in just a second. The loan to value, 80-20. Loan to value, 80% loan to 20% down payment. They may have, though, a set amount of money that they can put down regardless of what the sales price is. They may have $25,000, right? So whatever, you need to know that. And as we get to the loan to value here, you need to know that. So the type of loan, you need to know whether it's an owner occupied loan or an investment loan, and you will know that based upon how you're looking at the properties, but we have to mark that on our contract. The type of loan, the repayment of the interest, loan to value. If it's an FHA loan with a minimum down payment of 3.5%, then your loan to value is going to be 96.5/3.5. Those two numbers need to add up to 100%, and you're putting the loan amount first and the down payment amount reflected as a percentage second, and it's a ratio there. Our contract also does allow for you to put the loan amount there, which is fine if you do that. The one caveat that I have about that is if you use the loan amount and we renegotiate the sales price on a counteroffer or later on, when we're negotiating repairs or any of that, then we need to also make sure that we change that on an amendment, that we change that line. That's why I think it's really easier to use the loan to value. Your pre-approval letter should indicate whether it's a conventional FHA, VA, or some other kind of special loan, because we have those, we're seeing several lenders are offering down payment assistance loans. They're usually either classified as an FHA or conventional. Usually FHA are the ones that we're seeing. So that doesn't really affect what we put in this part of the contract, but we do actually have a box to check if that's the case. So make sure that you are, it's really best policy to, once you have the pre-approval letter, talk with your buyer, ask your buyer if it's okay if you have a conversation with the lender to kind of clarify some of these things if their pre-approval letter does not include all of the information you need. And here's the other key piece that you need. And this is one that I deal with all the time with agents writing contracts, and not just new agents, it's experienced agents that gloss over this one too. One of the questions, or one of the things that we have to indicate in the financing paragraph of our contract, is the interest by percentage that the buyer is willing to pay. You have to address one of two lines on the contract. The number one, they will pay interest up to a cap. Interest rates are kind of clicking down just a little bit right now, but they could go back up. So if your buyer cannot or will not pay more than 7.75% interest, that is something that we will reflect on their offer. If during the period of time between contract and closing, interest rates have gone up to 8 or 8.25, and then that says your buyer will not then continue on with the purchase of that property, will not get the loan, will not or cannot get the loan. That's a conversation to have with your buyer and or the lender if interest rates go up, right? So, and again, they're pretty volatile right now. They are kind of ticking down, but they're still pretty volatile. However, that weakens your offer just a little bit in those times of a volatile interest rates. That can weaken your offer. The next line, because we have to address one of these two lines, the next line is you would check to say that the buyer will buy the property, whatever, regardless of what the interest rate is, will buy it at the prevailing interest rate at closing. Now, all of that being said, we have to address one of those two. So make sure you're talking with your buyer and their lender about that, because the lender has some input on that as well. The buyer may say, oh, I'll pay, it doesn't matter to me. I'll pay, I want this house so bad, I'll pay whatever interest rate is. But the lender may say, oh, no, they don't qualify if it goes up over 8.25. So make sure you're having that conversation with both. The prevailing, if you can say that truly, if you can honestly say that and legitimately say that, that is a stronger offer. So make sure that, you're having that conversation with your buyer. I was going to make another point there. Oh, all of that being said, make sure you're also talking with the buyer and the lender about the possibility of the buyer locking in an interest rate. Most lenders allow a lock-in, a one-time, sometimes, lock-in, so that the buyer will not pay over what the interest rate is today. They might float it down once, but it's locked in. So even if interest rates, if they're at 7.5 today, even if they do go back up a little bit, your buyer may have the ability to lock in at the 7.5 or below. So make sure you're having those conversations. We are not expected to be lending experts. That's why we work with good lenders, but we are expected to know these things about the way that loans work and the way our contract works. So I see that all the time, that buyers have left that blank, and it's blanks have to be addressed if they're in our contract. All right, then the financing terms and then the listing agency role. This information is available on MLS. It is on the left-hand side, right under the agent's name. We have the agent's name, the brokerage, the contact information, email address, and then it will say, it says LA cap is what it says on MLS. And I don't know that that's going to change. Some of the other things on MLS will change later on this summer, but I don't think that will, because we have to know that. LA CAP stands for listing agent capacity. How is that listing agent working for that seller? And you will find there are three different ways that you can find the LA CAP to be filled in. Most of the time, it's going to be designated seller's agent. Sometimes it will be seller's agent. Sometimes it will be transaction broker. So make sure you're reading that because we have to have that information correct on our contract. Again, state license law, Kansas and Missouri, both say that all parties to the contract have to know how all parties to the contract are being represented if they are. So we have to fill that out. We can't expect anyone to sign a contract that's not completely filled out. So as we are filling out the contract, that's information that's readily available to us on MLS, and we have to make sure that we are filling it out correctly. You will always be a designated buyer's agent, right? You know, if you are working with an unrepresented buyer, make sure number one, that you've talked about payment of commission, but that would be the only time that you are not. If you are working not a designated buyer's agent, if you're working with an unrepresented buyer, then you will be a transaction broker because you are not representing either party. So, all right, but always make sure that you have looked on MLS to see the role that the listing agent is playing in that transaction and make sure that it's correct. We have to have that. And then all parties sign that. Make sure that you in this situation, writing the offer, you're the licensee assisting the buyer. All right, so then our required KW Key Partners internal documents, they are not included with your offer. You don't send them to the listing agent, but they do have to be in your buyer folder in .loop and in Command. Buyer's estimated expense worksheet. Again, that's required. State license law requires it. So therefore we require it. That's one of those things, y'all, that they can hold your commission check for. In fact, any of these things that they can hold your commission check for if you don't have it properly filled out in the file and complete. Our exclusive buyer agency agreement has to be in there signed, and it's not our key partners affiliated business disclosure anymore. It is our KW and KC affiliated business disclosure franchise agreement. So, all right, so there's that. And once again, it is on my list to get all of that updated. Does anyone have any questions about that? I'm going to stop share because then I'm going to spend the rest of this hour. No one has anything for me in chat. And again, I want everyone to understand that you can interrupt me at any time during this class. It would be just like you're here in person. You just start talking. So so someone did just now. Where's the estimated expense document? Oh, good question, Autumn. Autumn's asking all of the questions. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Oh, that was Stephen that asked about the CMA too. I was misreading that. Stephen asked about the estimated expense documents. So there are two available to you. There's the KCRAR, which is in the 2024 residential forms template folder in KCR in .loop. See, I'm not being able to get my brain and my tongue to work well together this morning. However, once again, I will suggest we have an internal document that I personally prefer to use. That is also available in the portal. I think maybe Kristen has that in the Power Tools. Pretty sure that she might not have the updated one in there because there have been some changes made to it over the last couple of years, but it's certainly in the portal, and in the same place that you're going to find that Big Dog CMA in the portal under the KW and KC documents. And once you open the documents folder, everything's in alphabetical order, and that also is in the MLS CMA folder. And so you have to scroll, and that's almost at the bottom of that list, but it will be the buyer's estimated closing cost worksheet, our internal form, and the seller's estimated proceeds worksheet is in there too. The reason that I prefer to use those, since we are kind of now getting to that point to talk about this, is number one, it does all of the calculations for you automatically, and you just have to put them in. And in fact, here, let me go ahead and show you because they do have that pulled up. Give me 1 second here. Buyer's estimated worksheet right here. It is basically has all of the same basic information because we have to disclose all closing costs. So both the KCRAR form and the KWNKC, which again, we need to change the logo on this one, both have the same information on them, a little bit different format. Shows up a little bit different. So I'll put, and here's what it looks like. And this is just a PDF of this, but this is one of my cheat sheets that I will send to anyone that wants it, that I've made this cheat sheet for you. So, so here we are. So, and I just added this note at the top, the KWNKC form does most of the calculations for you. There's still some things that you have to figure, such as, so we have again, we have our buyer's name up here, property address and estimated closing costs. Again, you need to know what, based upon the purchase price that the buyer is offering. And I do want to point this out too. Oh, it's not there. This one actually does have two different, it actually, when you get the actual form, it has two separate columns on it, so that you can tell the buyer, well, based on the price that you're offering, but we may get a counter offer based on that. And so kind of worst case scenario there. You have to know what their down payment is, and that's just their total down payment, including their earnest deposit. And so then you will know what their loan amount is based upon that. And again, you need to know what kind of loan they're getting, what their down payment percentage is. So that's something that you do kind of have to figure there. So I'll come, or do I want to do this? Yeah, I'll come. No, I'll do this now because this is something that we need to do before we actually write up the offer. Oh, one more chat question here. Stephen wants to know if I can send that to him. Of course I will. I can send it to everyone here who hasn't already received it. So yeah, just let me know either here in the chat, because I definitely will be checking this, or text me and let me know if you want the BEE, buyer's estimated expense worksheet here. And you can tell that I cut it off here because it really does say worksheet on the actual form, but I cut it off. I didn't want that second column showing because I wanted to write my notes here. But here's your cheat sheet for you. So here I kind of show you, and David, as he developed this, put in, kind of some generic numbers in here. So some of them will change based upon what the offer price is. Some of them will change based upon what title company you're using. So we don't automatically, and some of those costs go up too. So I'll always be checking that. And you can, always, it's an Excel worksheet. It's a live worksheet. So you can, make your changes and then save your own copy of that if you're, working with title companies and that their fees are a little bit different than what's reflected on here. So, it's yours and it's here for you to use. So David wants all of that to be available to everyone. And I have these cheat sheets available for everyone here too. So on this particular cheat sheet, so I have just an example going on here, $200,000 sales price, 10% down payment. So we know then that it's a $180,000 loan. I tell you over here, I wrote out here over on the side where you will get this information, either from the lender, from the pre-approval letter. And I wrote lender on there a lot of times, but a lot of times it is a call to the lender. I'm not going to go over this in detail because I do that in a separate class, but I do want you to know that this is available to you. I also want to point out to you another form. Let's see, it is here. So I have my ready to make an offer, and then I have my buyer's estimated worksheet explanation. So someone tell me here, please, if you are now seeing the buyer estimated worksheet explanation rather than.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. So I'm not ever sure that Zoom follows me when I change pages. So thank you. Thank you, Callie. All right. So here's the worksheet explanation, because I think this is important too. Not only do you do the estimated worksheet, and I'll also tell you here, you don't necessarily have to use either one of those forms, the KCRAR or an internal form. If you're working with the lender from whom you can receive one of their good faith estimates, that works too. If they have given the buyer and you an estimate, a good faith estimate, and that's what they call it, of the buyer's closing costs, you can use that instead of doing either one of those our two forms. However, you do have to check it to make sure that it includes everything. Sometimes those good faith estimates don't include or enough of the inspection costs. If you know that your buyer is going to be doing a whole house inspection and a sewer line inspection and a radon test and a foundation, a structural engineer report, the good faith estimate will not reflect all of those. So make sure that that's there. A lot of times those good faith estimates also will not include your additional commission, the $495 or whatever it is you have agreed with on that buyer. Or if you're writing an offer on a property in which the seller's not paying commission and your buyer will be paying your commission, the good faith estimate that you get from the lender will not include that. So make sure you are looking over that really well and including things that they have not included. And that you just, bring it into dotloop, you just put text boxes down at the bottom, and then, because they will have a total of theirs, and then you'll just add then yours in so that you have a grand total on it. I didn't point it out on that one, but your buyers have to sign it. All buyers have to sign that. We also have to give an estimate of what their monthly payment's going to be, which you can get from the good faith estimate, but you can also figure it. And we'll talk about that next month, but and that's on that's the second page of both of those, the KCRAR and our internal form. But your lender will include that on their good faith estimate as well. But you have, all buyers have to sign it and you have to sign it. All of those signatures have to be on it to go into your loop and on into command. But again, one of those requirements for you to get your commission check. And after all, that's why we're all here, right? Yeah, even though we love selling houses, we also really love getting paid for it. So, all right, so I have given an explanation on each one of the lines. Now, once again, this is based on our internal form. And I just give the line number. You can use this as a reference if you're using the KCRAR. It might just take you a few minutes to kind of get things worked out there. But because I just really like to push using the form that's available to you for David. Number one, it has everything on there that you need. David's, excuse me. I'm so sorry. David has added a couple of pages on that, tabs on that Excel spreadsheet that show, how to figure FHA upfront premium, how to figure PMI, a couple of little things on there that you don't get with the KCRAR. So lots of reasons why I prefer using that one. So, okay, so there's that. I will send those to everyone. And Stephen, you just asked for the BE, I think, but I will send you the worksheet explanation as well. All right, so here in the last half hour or so of the class, I do also want to show you that I have, close that out, have a 2024 sample contract for you here. And once again, I know that this is in Kristen's Power Tools, and I'm happy to send this to you as a PDF. There is absolutely no shame in you all carrying this around with you and using this while you're writing your contract. Absolutely no shame in that at all. So I have cheat sheets that I still use all the time. So don't ever hesitate to do that. But I do have it clearly marked here as the 2024 sample residential real estate sales contract. I haven't done it for the commercial. I haven't done it for land. I can, probably not in the next 2 weeks, but I can and have those in there. But if you are working with a commercial lender, another chat just showed up. All right, Kelly's asking for the cheat sheet. All right, here. All right, happy to do that. Okay, so I have And I think if it's not in blue, if my ink is not in blue when I send it to you, ask me to resend it, because I put the what you are going to be filling in blue ink here, so that kind of stands out. There are a couple of cheats for you that are already built into our contract. The first being, so it's a couple of things that I want to point out, because today really is supposed to be the day we're writing the contract. So a couple of things that I like to point out. And the top left-hand top left-hand of the first page of our contract, you see the Kansas City Regional Association of Realtors logo there. You know you're using the right form there. That you will get this on the KCRAR templates and .loop. Again, make sure you're using the correct one. Residential is the one you're going to be using most of the time, because there is a land one in there and there's a commercial one in there. Also, the other cheat that I like to show to you, because this is how our KCRA forms work. Once you have the contract pulled up in the top right-hand corner, if there is a gray triangle up in that corner, that means that there is something on that page that you have to address, that there is a blank for you to fill in, right? So it's there. I hope you all remember learning in your pre-license class that since we are not attorneys, we cannot write contracts, even though that's the terminology we use all the time. We are not writing contracts. We are filling in blanks on approved contracts, contracts that have been approved by the Kansas Real Estate Commission, the Missouri Real Estate Commission, Kansas Bar Association, Missouri Bar Association, Kansas Association of Realtors, Missouri Association of Realtors, Kansas City Regional Association of Realtors. So it's gone through lots of legal eyes and been approved by all of those people. We can the only thing we can do is fill in blanks. And there's not a whole lot of leeway in what we can put in those blanks. And we have 3 exceptions to that. That we'll get to here on the second page, but even if we don't get through the rest of the contract, which we absolutely will not, we cannot possibly do this in the next 24 minutes, because then there are other things that I want to point out to you too. But so I have this for you here, and everything that you need to address or that you need to know, I have put in blue ink on this. This is one of those things, and I know that any of you that have sat through these classes with me before, so yes, Connor, Callie, because Callie actually came through pre-license with me, and Stephen, have heard me say this multiple times. No one expects you to memorize any of these documents. That's ridiculous. I haven't memorized any of these documents. I've memorized portions of them, but certainly not all of them. Nobody expects that of you. Nobody could do that. What I do expect, because you're here at the KW and KC launch program, I would hope that you take the time to, number one, completely read the contract and be completely familiar with what it says. And number two, make sure that you understand what every paragraph says in it. I have not done that for you here because I want you to come up with your own and I guess I kind of have on some of these, but I want you to come up with your own little synopsis of what each paragraph says. 2 reasons. Number one, you never want to be caught off guard when a seller or buyer asks you something about the contract. You want to know whether our contract deals with it or not. Right now, if you're not sure, again, no shame in ever saying I'm not sure or I don't know the answer to that question when it's something, when it's something outside of our expertise. But I think that knowing the contract is well within our expertise. I think you need to know what it says. Can we interpret that? No, right? We're not attorneys. We can tell people what our contract says. We cannot tell them what happens if they decide they don't want to abide by one of the terms of the contract, one of the things that our contract says they are agreeing to. If the seller calls and says, I've decided I don't want to sell to that buyer, right? We cannot interpret any of that, right? But what, and sellers, you'll get, I hope you don't, but you probably will at some point in your career get that phone call from that seller or that buyer that says, well, I know I'm under contract. How can I get out of it? Well, our contract says that the times you can legitimately get out of the contract and expect to get your earnest deposit back are, during inspections. We've already done that. If you can't get the loan, we've already got the loan commitment letter. So if you want to back out of the contract at this point, you need here are the names of 3 good real estate attorneys, right? We cannot say anything about interpretation of our contract, but I do expect you to know what every paragraph is about. All right, so again, I'm not going to go through this line by line because we don't have time to even begin that, but I've probably here also told you where you get this information. So if the ownership status is shown as REO and MLS, you know that it's a foreclosed property. Or if there's the word foreclosure shows up anywhere in the comments section of MLS. Most of this information you're going to be getting from MLS or from the tax records. And so once again, improvements on the property, check the county tax records to make sure that if it is a mobile home, whether it's considered to be real property or personal property. We get our the street address. Make sure that you're using the one from the county records. And that's different from the mailing address, because again, anyone that's gone through class with me before, the pre-license class, knows that the street address is actually what is assigned by the post office for their benefit, right? That is not a legal description. It may not even be the same street address that the county uses. So make sure you're pulling from the county records. Legal description, you pull from the county records or use a legal description addendum. If you are writing it, if you look at county records and it's a huge long one that's part government survey system, and it would not be legible if you cut and paste into our contract, then use the legal description addendum if it's lengthy, or if one is provided by the listing agent in MLS, make sure that you use that and assign your buyer signatures to that. I also like to point out here, before we move on from this page, that your buyers will initial the bottom right-hand corner of every page of our 16-page document, except for page 13 and 16. So, now we're in paragraph number 1, the header up here. And when I'm talking with you all about documents, when I say the header, it's usually the seller and buyer's name and the property description. In the contract, it includes those 2 things, whether it's an REO, a foreclosed property, and making sure that it is a real estate and not personal property that we're dealing with here. But paragraph number 1 still now talks about identification of the property. We are still talking about identification of the property here as we get to the bottom of page 1. This is our disclosure of the fact that the seller's disclosure will identify what is staying with the property and what is not. That is the governing document. Only if the 2 parties agree to something different here in this document, that's the only way that the information on the seller's disclosure changes. It is the governing document, regardless of what MLS might say. The seller's disclosure, unless we change something here on the contract. Make sure you are completely familiar with this list of items that we expect to stay with the property that may or may not be listed on the seller's disclosure, but anything that is nailed, bolted, screwed, glued, or otherwise permanently attached to the property, including but not limited to the things that are in this list. Make sure you are completely familiar with this list. The curtains thing is one of the things that takes sellers by surprise all the time. Any window coverings in there, the fireplace equipment, all that kind of stuff. So make sure you are familiar with that. Still in paragraph number 1, then this is, I'm so glad that I got to this as a minimum. These 3 paragraphs, paragraph 1B, 1C, and 1D, are the only places in our contract where we can actually put verbiage. Most of the time we're checking boxes and filling in blanks with numbers or dates, but we are allowed to put verbiage in these 3, and you'll notice they're pretty small boxes, right? The law does not want us writing a whole novel in this at all. we need to, and I also like to make perfect, and especially to those of you that haven't come through this class before, please don't put anything in here until you have talked with me or Kristen. Your coach may give you a general idea of what to put in here, but coaches aren't perfect. I'm certainly not perfect. Kristen's certainly not perfect. However, there are certain ways that we want to word things in here because so we'll talk about paragraph 1B here, our additional inclusions, things that are personal property or that the seller's disclosure indicated are not staying with the property, but we do want them to stay. So we want to limit that. We don't want to put anything other than, as I said, the refrigerator or the washer and dryer. I've certainly seen all three of those things come through, but I start getting real antsy about that, especially if it's an FHA loan or a 3% conventional, 3% down conventional loan. So just be really careful there, and things have to be worded properly to pass the muster of the lender. You might ask the lender how they want things worded. But we also, because anytime we are writing anything in here, and this pertains to the contract or to when we're doing our resolution of unacceptable conditions too, we want to make sure that we are being specific, but not too specific. We can't leave things too general for misinterpretation. We don't want to put our client in harm's way by making things too specific. So there are certain ways that we want to word certain things, right? So and in my little explanation here in the cheat sheet here, paragraph 1C are the personal property exclusions. This would be where the seller's disclosure is indicating something that is staying that we don't want. One of the most common things, even though it's kind of questionable which one of these paragraphs it goes into, some of the things, the two things that we typically see that the buyer doesn't want to remain with the property that the seller has indicated is staying are swing sets and above ground swimming pools. So those two things, are they nailed, bolted, screwed, glued, or otherwise permanently attached to the property? If we're talking about one of those big wooden play sets that may be concreted into the ground, then yes, right, that would be considered real estate, not personal property. The above ground swimming pools are not usually permanently attached to the property. Now, an in-ground pool is, but the above ground are not. So I typically put those things in the additional terms and conditions down here. And then again, always check with me or with Kristen, talk with your coach about this. But the additional inclusions, additional terms and conditions, this really isn't about property. This is about agreements, right? So the things that we would put in here, things that we only put things in here that are not dealt with elsewhere, anywhere in the contract. If our buyer is wanting to make their contract look a little more attractive by offering to pay some of the seller's closing costs, $1,500 of seller's closing costs paid at closing, that's where we would put that because we don't have anywhere else in the contract to put that. The example I gave earlier, if there's a dead tree in the backyard that we want the seller to deal with, that would go in here in our additional terms and conditions. We put things in here that are not dealt with anywhere else in the contract. So as we go through this, and again, we're not going to go through it all the time. I really wanted to hit on those though, because those are the only three places that we can add verbiage to our contract. Otherwise, we're filling in blanks. Throughout the contract, I have shown you how to or not fill in the blanks, where you're going to get the information to properly fill in the blanks, whether it's a conversation with your buyer, conversation with the lender, you get it from the lender, you get it from the title company, et cetera, et cetera. and otherwise how to fill in. Again, reminding you on every page that the buyer's initials go there. Yeah, only other thing that I really, really, really wanted to cover while we're in here. Here's our, page 4 is our financial part where we're talking about sales price and all of that. But what I really like to talk about is back here on page 13, where once again, to make it perfectly clear to all of you, that this is where we fill in, this is state license law requirement, state license contract requirement that we disclose who is being represented. We have our agency disclosure up here, but it also says that you have given all parties to the contract the agency disclosure brochures from Kansas or Missouri. So that's why, I say to include both of them. Definitely the one where the property is located here, because it says that you've given it to them, that it's been provided. So don't make your clients liars by signing this if you haven't given it to them. It also tells them that it is required reading. They need to read it. We can't make anybody do anything. But again, where you get the information, it's on MLS. We are responsible for filling in the side that's the licensee assisting the seller, because we don't want anyone signing an incomplete contract, an incomplete document. So all of this information is readily available. You will know how you're working assisting the buyer. So to go on the right-hand side there, I do like to point out here on line 715, is the seller paying paying us? Then we check that box. If your buyer is paying you anything, even if we're getting compensated from the seller, if your buyer is paying you that $495, you're going to be checking both boxes, that you're being compensated by both parties. This is going to become a big deal as we move on into the summer and as things may change just a little bit. There may be some sellers that aren't willing to pay the buyer brokerage commission. And so, so make sure that you are reading everything on MLS that pertains to that currently, asking the right questions of the listing agent when that comes into effect. Make sure that you sign page 13 and that your buyer sign page 13. All parties sign page 13. And the signatures on this are just that everyone acknowledges that this information has been given and is true and correct. Then again, initials on every page. The last page back here, like to point this out too, our buyers will sign here. You will fill in all of the information about yourself here on the right-hand side underneath the buyer's information. It is a very nice thing for you to fill in the information on about the listing agent over here. If there is a listing agent, there are those times that there might not be a listing agent if you're selling a for sale by owner property, but it's not certainly any kind of requirement. But once again, it's just an indication that you are a good agent to that other agent and to the seller, which puts you in a good light and puts your buyer in a good light. Absolutely no reason for you not to fill that in. Then the only other thing that you sign on this is once your buyer has signed the offer, initialed every page and signed the offer, then you will sign on line 879 down here. This is a paragraph that certifies that no one has made any changes to the approved verbiage in the contract. You cannot certify that unless until you get it back signed by your buyer. You don't want your buyer going through and crossing out things or adding verbiage in there, right? So that's when you sign, when you sign line 879, you are certifying that no one's made any changes, you or the buyer. All right. Those are the things that I really, really, really wanted to hit. I'm going to stop share here, make sure that no, I don't have any other chat showing up here. In fact, I don't even know where my chats went. Oh, there they are. Okay, so let me know if you want any of those cheat sheets. Again, text me 913-219-2289. email me. And in fact, if you want the cheat sheets, it's maybe better if you email me, just so I have Stevens, I have Connor's, and I have Callie's email address, but I don't think that I have an email address yet for Autumn or for David. So if you're asking for those, please email me. And that is, my email is contracts, that's plural, CONTRACTSCOACH, contractscoach@kwkey.com. I know those of you that might confuse you, but that used to be our brokerage name, and I don't have my new one set up. So, and now I'm going to close this. Now I've got 2 QR codes that I'm going to flash up here for you. Haven't done this in a while. Even though I've written down everyone's name here, please, here's a QR code for checking in. So I'm going to hold this up here for a minute. Please check in here. This takes you to a site where you can say, I was at the contracts class on May 29th. And then we haven't talked about this in a while. One of the things that once you've signed up for launch, you know that there are certain requirements that we expect you to meet. I look at all of your paperwork, listing agreements, buyer agency agreements, certainly contracts, and all of the supplemental things that go, even as you are negotiating repairs, any amendments that you do on the contract. Please, please, please let me have eyes on those before you share them, or before you have your buyer sign them if you're receiving them from another agent. So then one of the other things that I haven't talked about in a while is that we have a contracts exam. That is, again, it's a spread. Oh no, it's a Google form. It's a Google form that, and this is kind of our way of checking whether or not you have actually read the contract. We will, now next month, I will also go through the preparing to write an offer, and then on Wednesday, we'll actually go into the offer, into the contract itself a little more in depth. It's just because of the holiday this week that I didn't do that today, because I do that every month. However, we do want you to be reading the contract yourself. And so the second QR code that I'm going to be showing up here is, will take you to that contracts exam. Here's the thing, just like, anything else here, I don't care how well you do on it. I just want you to attempt, right? And this is kind of open-ended, right? There are different ways that you could answer the questions on there. So it's not graded through Google form. I do have the correct answers on a worksheet for you, just so you can see that I'll send to you once I get it. But I know, so I'm done talking. Linda, apparently likes the sound of her own voice. So here is that QR code that will take you to that exam. Kristen and I have decided that we are going to start being much, much better about checking to make sure that everyone has done this exam. Again, I don't care how well you do on it. All right. It's the activity. At least you're being exposed to it. Gives us an indication that you are taking this seriously. I know that your coaches talk with you about lead generation and getting your name out there and customer service and all of that. And yes, all of that is important. However, the whole reason you do all of that is to get a contract signed. The contract is the most important part of what you do, right? All of that other stuff is very important, but you only are doing that so that you can get people under a contract. We find a buyer that wants to buy and a seller that wants to sell, and we're getting them together. So the contract is very, very, very important. As I said earlier in this class, Kristen and I like to say, two things that we like to say. Your client may be out negotiated. There may be things that they cannot meet, the money, but you will never, if you come through our class, we don't want you to be, and you will never be outmaneuvered on a contract, because you are going to know the contracts better than any other agent working out there, other than, other KWKC agents. Then the other thing is, please, please, please let me see everything as you're writing them before you send them, because it is so much easier for us to tell you how to change things before your client signs it. to keep you out of trouble, to keep your client out of trouble, to keep the brokerage out of trouble. And it is much easier for us to keep you out of trouble than it is for us to get you out of trouble. Sometimes it's too late, right? Sometimes things can be changed, but sometimes it's too late. So that's our goal for this. That's why we do all of this. We take you very seriously. We take your contracts very seriously. And so we want to help you in any way that we can. So, all right, it's time for me to sign off here. Everyone's got my contact information. Reach out if you have any questions. I will be sending Stephen and Kelly, because they reached out to me, the cheat sheets on the buyer estimated worksheets and on the sample contract. And two other ways that you can do that. You can practice writing a contract anytime. Just let me know that you're opening a loop and add me to the loop. Wednesday Night Warriors, we do the contract challenge once a month. Won't start this is the last Wednesday. So second Wednesday of the month, we will be announcing a property on which you can practice writing a contract and be in competition with other launch agents on that. We try to make that a fun activity, but by all means, you can write any number of practice contracts that you want. In fact, I would love you for that. And so just let me know and I'll sit with you. I'll go over them once. If you want to try to struggle through on your own, just let me know that. So that's it. All right, everybody have a great week. I will see you all next month. Oh, just got a chat come through. Autumn says thank you. So all right, absolutely. So
Thanks, Linda.
Thank you, Connor. Thanks for being here. All right. Talk to you all later.